Hello, welcome to another edition of Truth and Rhythm, brought to you by funkandstuff.net. This is the interview show that gets deep into the pocket with contemporary music's foremost masters of the groove. Available in video format at funkandstuff.net and on YouTube. Truth and Rhythm can now also be enjoyed on the go in its audio podcast version from funkandstuff.net, iTunes, and other leading providers. I'm Scott Dr. Goldfine, your host, musicologist, and author of Everything is on the One, The First Guide to Funk. Get your copy at Amazon if you don't have it yet. Whether you're watching or listening, I thank you so much for your continued support and interest. You've tuned in for a great show. My guest today is guitarist David Mackey, best known for his work with TConnection in the 1970s and 1980s. Funk R&B disco band who had 8 albums. They had 5 top 40 U.S. R&B hits, and a great mix of funk, R&B, disco on the TK label. So, David, how are you? So good to have you today.
Hey, I'm great. I'm great. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, and it's super to finally be able to connect with you.
Yeah, so, and of course, you're in the envious location of the Bahamas, right?
Yes, I am very hot. Well, you're in a hot place, too. But it's really, really hot here. And just happened to just get home, and I'm now down in our practice dungeon because I have a local band that, I've actually introduced quite a number of Bahamians who've been in and out of the bands into music of our era. Because I'm still into what, the styles of music that existed back in the 70s and the 80s and even some before that. The Beatles, I like the Beatles, I like the Isley Brothers, and it's just a wide mix of music.
Well, I think, as far as I know, you're the only band from there to really do, funk in a way that sounded like it was, could have come from the U.S. It was authentic funk. It wasn't, you had some island flavor in some of the stuff you did, but you could also bring the real funk too. And I don't know any other band from that island, that area that could do that.
Well, we in the Bahamas, one of the things that was really different from how it is in the United States, which I spent a lot of time in the United States. Actually, I spent a lot of years growing up in the Chicago area, playing blues and blues clubs and stuff like that. Here, the music was always integrated, it wasn't segregated. So we were into pop, rock, funk, classical, jazz. As a matter of fact, before I joined the band, the band did a cover version of Daniel, and everybody thought that it was our song. And a lot of the music that we did was really an eye opener for Bahamians, and our music is influenced by it. Like if you listen to On Fire and Prisoner of My Mind and a lot of those type of tunes, you'll hear classical elements because our band leader, Theophilus Coakley, is classically trained, jazz trained, and he's literally a music genius. I'd never actually encountered anyone that I've spent time with like that is a musician on that level. So he was able to actually bring all of us up musically to a higher level. And a lot of my playing as a guitarist is influenced by what I got from him. So a lot of what I do will be some of the kind of movements that a keyboard player would be doing.
So interesting to hear that it was sort of a melting pot there in terms of the music, which is great. But tell me what it was like growing up there, and how and when did you get into music? Well,
my story is unique from the rest of the guys because I lived in the Bahamas when I was in my younger years. And because my parents, my dad moved to the States. And so with me, I actually grew up more in the Chicago area. And so my influence, musical influence, came from, were more like rock oriented. And I spent a lot of time, I played in blues clubs on the south side of Chicago in the Roughneck areas there in the wee hours of the morning. played with some of the old guys, like I played with Muddy Waters Jr., played with, sat in with some guys, old blues guys like Lefty Diz, and we played with a band that was Sun Seals. And these guys were all, you know, deep blues. You know, Chicago was the blues capital of the world. And so a lot of my musical influence comes from that. And I listen to a lot of Hendrix. You know, I listened to the Isley Brothers. And when I joined the band, because the band existed, I'm not one of the original members. I joined actually on the second album. And the band existed before in Nassau. And I came in on the Do What You Want to Do album, so I was in on the tour. And for me, I met because Theophilus Coakley and Kirkwood Coakley are my family. We're cousins. And so they had this huge song, Do What You Want to Do, which was a massive hit that stayed 10 weeks at #1 on the dance charts. And I was in university at the time. His sisters lived in Chicago as well, too. And when they came to do a concert with this huge record, their sisters brought them over, and I was in university at the time, but obsessed with music. I was going to do electronic engineering, but music was just that drug. Those 12 notes just were hypnotic for me, and still are, because if I could, I'd drop everything I'm doing now and get right back into music, because that's a passion, it's a part of me. And so they brought them over to the house where I lived, well, actually in the suburb of Chicago, Evanston. And I played them some demos that I did, and they were quite impressed with my playing. And when I went to go and see them in concert in Chicago, which was a big sold-out concert, I went backstage and I said to them, you know, if you ever think about expanding, you know, give me a call. And I never thought anything would ever happen from it. And 2 weeks later, they called me and said, Dave, you ready? And I went, what? And they sent my tickets, a ticket for me to head down to Criteria, the legendary Criteria Studios, which has recorded the likes of Hendrix has been in there, James Brown, the Eagles. A lot of the classic hits of the 70s were recorded in this legendary recording studio, owned by a guy by the name of Mac Emmerman. The Bee Gees did all of their stuff there, except the later stuff, they built their own studio, Middle Ear. But when I went there, the Bee Gees were in there every day. They were in a studio upstairs because they're Criteria, they're like 5 studios. And they were, you know, they used to go upstairs to the studio, which was pretty much like theirs inside this complex. We used to see them every day. And Julio Iglesias was there too at the time. And Olivia Newton-John passed through, and the one who died I think it was Barry or Andy Gibb, passed through there, and so yeah, and actually their producer by the name of Albie Galutin, at that time, you know, the keyboards aren't like how they are now, where all of the stuff they're all samples and they're all pre-done for you. When you were using a synthesizer, and I have something that's kind of like from that era now. If you see this here, which has the name Moog on it, which I'm sure you know that name, Moog. It all had to be programmed. So these devices came, and there was no push a button and the sound is there. No, you push a button and you had to go through these different oscillators and filters and everything to generate the sound. And you know, the devices have to warm up because they drift out of tune. And so Albie came in, and he did some of the programming for us. Actually, he did the programming, the low growl synth that's in Do What You Want to Do. So if you listen to that, you hear the low synth in there. He was involved with that.
Wow. So Chicago, what a great soaking up the authentic Chicago blues. You can't beat that. I've been there a few times myself, and it was a thrill to get to go to some of those, you know, real gritty blues clubs and hear those guys. Yeah. So Dave, when did you first pick up the guitar though, and how did you learn how to play?
I actually started the guitar late. I initially, it's something that I always wanted to do. but you know, it's not an easy instrument to play. And I hooked up with a friend of mine who was a really good buddy of mine by the name of Jim Duplo. He's right now he's a podiatrist. And you know, I always wanted to be in a band, and it's like, well, what's going to be the easiest way in? And it's like, okay, well, if you learn the bass, you can get in, and because it's a whole lot simpler, you know, to play the basic bass. And so I did that, and I got some tips and tricks from him. And I hung out at music stores on the north side of Chicago and in Evanston, and to hear, you know, as soon as I heard somebody doing stuff that I didn't know, you know, I'd dash over and ask them to show it to me. And you know, then when I went to university, when I should have been really into my work, I was still the music. And I connected up with a friend of mine who was an incredible harmonica player and also played guitar. And he showed me some simple sort of tricks that just revolutionized my playing. So when I came from break after being at university, and I was jamming with my friends, they were like, wow, it was on a whole other level from even the guy who got me into it. So, you know, it was an obsession. As far as guitar itself, I didn't really take much lessons. I did spend some time with some guys, but my thing was, you know, the basics and just playing the strings and the things that they would show you as somebody just coming up, you know, playing, whether it's Mary Had a Little Lamb or what have you. It just didn't work for me. I needed to go right straight in and right at it. And through being affiliated with a lot of people, I was able to get into it. And my thing was, I wanted to sound really strong. You know, I wanted a very powerful sound. And so, you know, and that really comes in how you do your note bends and, you know, how you feel the guitar. And so I spent a lot of time, you know, I would just grab a guitar and I would just bend the hell out of it, bend the notes out of it, and work to get the strong, you know, the strong sound. You know, I was able to spend time around a lot of guys who played a variety of different styles. There was a friend of mine who was a Southern rocker, and he showed me Southern stuff. And you know, they did a lot of listening. And when I joined with TConnection, it was my sound and everything and my approach that really enticed them to bring me in, because I was the youngest guy. I was like 19 years old, and the other guys were older. And it's like, you know, you're going to bring this kid in. How's it going to work? You know. But I came in there really obsessed with music, so I was just like that. You know,
sounds like you're a little quicker study with the music than you were with college.
Yeah, but the thing about it is, when I finally settled down and said, I'm going to get serious with this, with my studies, that's when the opportunity came. Because I pretty much was like, this is not going to work. I'm not going to be able to do this. And so I had hunkered down, and I was ready to do my schoolwork. And then that's when the opportunity came, which seems to be how it is in life all the time. Mm-hmm. There's something you're really working hard at, and then you finally say, well, it's not going to happen. And you go to something else, and you're like, ready, I'm going to make this happen. Then what you wanted before comes in, and it's like, okay, either you're going to take it or you're going to keep going on that path. And I took it. And it was, you know, it was a thoroughly exciting ride for me, because, you know, I was a guy who I hadn't played in front of any more than like 50 people. And, you know, when I joined the band, we were recording and also touring. So you'd record and you go, a gig comes up. So we went on tour. So the first concert tour that I went on was with the Isley Brothers. Mm-hmm. And here, you know, just a few weeks earlier, I was listening to them on the radio, and Ernie Isley and his guitar playing and all of that. And those guys were just amazing. I loved the music. And there I was on stage. So from 50 people to 25,000 people in Savannah, Georgia. And it was like, I was like stoned, not on drugs. The high on the music was just unbelievable. Because, you know, back at that time, which you can identify with, There was no pocket devices. There was not even videotapes. So when a concert came in town, it was massive. It was huge, because other than that, people went to the movies, and there weren't these other distractions.
Oh, yeah.
So our concerts were just an incredible experience. And we toured throughout the States. We were supposed to go to Europe, because Europe actually was our largest market. And when we left TK Records, and we went to Capitol, which is where we did the majority of our recordings, our manager, we were just about to go on a European tour, and our new manager, who happened also, he was also the manager for Bob Marley and Jimmy Cliff. And he also used to manage Marvin Gaye, a guy by the name of Don Taylor. And he uncovered the management team that we had before were about to rip us off. And so we never ended up in Europe, like I say, because we've been on Top of the Pops, we've been on Soul Train, we've been on American Bandstand. We did TV specials with Donna Summer, the Bee Gees, Village People, and all those guys from the disco era. So, we had, it was quite the ride. It was quite an amazing ride.
Yeah, definitely. So the first album that you had mentioned with the hit before you came was Magic in 1977, right?
Yeah.
And that had the big first hit, Do What You Want to Do.
The biggest song we had. Yeah.
Yeah, so that song had a touch of funk, but I would say it was a little more dance club type of thing than straight out funk.
Well, part of our constant battle was that it was the disco era, but we really were funk people, and so there was always a battle with our producer, who was a disco guy, and we wanted to do, like, if you were to hear the original version of Do What You Want to Do, it doesn't sound like this one. Which it probably would not have hit either like that, because our producer was just in in the circuit. He also did Peter Brown. You remember him?
Yeah.
Do You Want to Get Funky with Me, and a couple other hits. Guy by the name of Corey Wade, with Henry Stone, and his thing was disco, and then that's what was making the money for us. But our heart was in funk.
I felt that going on in the records, and it's interesting to hear you say that, because I felt like, they were constantly kind of working together, a little against each other, and you were in both places at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, listen to that song, you'll also hear all of the classical influence from Theo, the band leader, in there, and string break and all of that orchestration.
So was the band living in America at some point? I know. Did they ever come to Miami, or what?
Oh yeah, Miami was stuff at home, but we lived in the Bahamas. Was our base where we lived, but we would only spend, at that time, we would spend about maybe the most 3 to 4 months. The rest of the time, recording was like 3 to 4 months, and then there was the touring and promotional gigs. So we, Criteria is in Miami, so we would be there. We did. I think 3 albums at Criteria, and we did another one at Studio Center, which is right around the corner from there, back at that time. So it was a central hub of recording. And we did our At Midnight album at Studio Center. And then we did other albums in New York, the Power Station, which is now also renamed. That's another legendary studio. At that time, we bumped into Aerosmith, who were recording across the hall from us, and also Diana Ross was recording upstairs, and Blondie was there. So I mean, these were like the places where all of the recordings happened. Because back then we were playing, for most of it we were playing real drums, and it was the sound of bands existed, like in R&B now. Like what band is there? Can you name a band? It's a singer, and if he's got some backup, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, from my perspective. But so were you were with the band though when they were still at TK to some extent? Did you guys ever?
Well, remember, I came in. I came in on the second album. The first album, I came in '77 when Do What You Want to Do was out. And the second album, I was on for everything from then on.
Okay, so did you guys tour with Casey and the Sunshine Band? I mean, that was the other big act.
It never happened, you know. We were on the same label. We were all on 2K. I remember, you know, there were different functions that we would bump into him at. There was like a big record party in New York, and then there was Casey's album release party that happened in Miami, where they released it platinum, and we were there with him with that. And Casey's been here in concert. You know, I've seen him and talked to him and stuff, but we never performed on the same stage. It's been kind of a natural, actually, because we were pretty close together.
Yeah.
You know, styles weren't too far apart. But no, it didn't happen.
So Dave, I'm wondering, you know, when you came into the band, you're this young guy and you're playing guitar. Did you kind of step on the toes of anyone else who had been playing guitar or wanted to play guitar in the band?
Well, what happened was there was a guitar player in there, and he ended up leaving when we went to Capitol because we had Berkeley Van Bird, who's deceased now. He died a couple years back of cancer. And we had Monty Brown, who was the other guitar player. And when we left to go to Capitol, they left the band at that time. And they had some other stuff that they were working on. And we went on to Capitol, myself, Theo Kirkwood, and Monks, our percussion player, who actually went on to join Bahamas. You know, Who Let the Dogs Out?
Yeah.
Joined them. And so he did well for himself because he was there for that hit. And yeah.
Wow, you could make a career off that a hit like that.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so we're talking about some of the songs, and I just want to go through a list of some of the ones that were hit singles and better known for TConnection. On Fire was another one that we talked about.
Album.
Let Yourself Go.
Yeah.
At Midnight.
Yeah, that was on at Studio Center.
That one actually definitely, you could really hear the funk and disco influences in that one, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Saturday Night. And A Little More. That's the extent of this list. What's that?
A Little More Love.
A Little More Love. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys had 8 records. So you did 3, you said, at TK?
At Criteria. At Criteria Recording Studios, we did 3 there, from what I remember.
But the label was
TK.
Yeah.
Well, the main label was TK, but they put it out on a label called Dash, which was a subsidiary of TK.
Okay. So the TConnection album, that was the one that came out in 1978, and that was the one that really hooked me because I was a funk guy, and when I heard that, Funk Connection or Funk Connection, however you want to say it, and well, great ballad too, but you had the hits and Saturday Night, At Midnight, and then the Funk Connection song was just awesome. So tell me about the making of that record, Dave.
Well, trying to recall now, you know, we worked with the guitar part, and then Theo and Monty, who's the other guitar player, they did the lyrics together, and he's the one who actually did the sort of rap thing in there. You know, it was influenced by P-Funk. You can hear that. P-Funk and some of the stuff that Ray Parker did, like with Rufus, and the guitar was influenced by what Rufus did, like You Got the Love. You remember that?
Yeah, it's a great one.
The guitar you'll hear, we're using the same type of technique on it. And actually, the engineer who worked on that project, he and I keep in contact through Facebook, a guy by the name of Gary Vandy. He's worked on quite a number of projects. The assistant producer that worked with us, the guy by the name of Alex Sadkin, he went on to produce quite a number of hits with Foreigner, He also went on with Duran Duran. He was our assistant producer, and he was one of the He actually used to run Compass Point Studios in Nassau, which we never ended up recording in. Chris Blackwell, he wanted us to record in there, but for whatever reason, it never happened. I think it didn't happen because we used to like to go away. It wasn't a big deal for us to be sitting in Nassau. It would be just like being home. And so while it's a big deal for somebody living in the States or Canada to come to the Bahamas and say like, wow, I'll be in Nassau and hang out, for us, it's just like, it was no big deal. It had no spark to it.
Is that where Sly and Robbie was doing a lot of their stuff?
Yes, yes. Yeah. A lot of it. Actually, like the biggest rock album in history was recorded there, and that's the one with AC/DC with Back in Black and all of that. That was recorded there. A whole string of hits were recorded at Compass Point. And of course, Bob Marley, who was Chris Blackwell's artist on Island Records, was on that label.
Wow. Well, this TConnection album, I sense it took you guys to a kind of a new level of success and exposure with radio play, and I think as being sort of more of an album artist. Do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, we were more of an album artist because we would bend to make our music more commercial, but we were more because you had a band of like musicians, and I say that because a lot of the bands bring in studio musicians to play the parts, and then the guys would learn it. To give as an example, when we signed with Capitol, our first session at the studio there, the power station. When we got into the studio, we saw all these musicians there. So a guitar player, keyboard player, percussionist, drummer. We did use a drummer because we had the drummer from Luther Vandross who used to tour with him. A guy by the name of Yogi Horton, he ended up committing suicide. Not because of us, but that's what happened. So as we were going to go and do our stuff, these studio musicians were sitting there, and we were like confused. And so as we struck up our first couple of notes, the guys started packing up their stuff and say, "You don't need us," because they're used to bands that come in there, but they can't really play, or can't play on a studio level because the demands in the studio are much greater than when you're playing live. When you're dealing with the producers and stuff, your timing has to be precise, and your instrument has to be tuned properly, and you have to be able to improvise on the spot and come up with with different riffs and different ideas, as they call for them. So.
Yeah, well, now today more than ever, the reality that you're speaking there.
It's gone.
Yeah. On this album, I thought too that you guys really showed that you could do a nice ballad. Love Supreme is real nice. In fact, kind of a little bit of an Earth, Wind, and Fire vibe, really.
Well, Earth, Wind, and Fire they were our idols, and so yeah, there is the Earth, Wind, and Fire influence, and you can certainly hear it in that song, and as we did more other albums, it really came through. That it's the Earth, Wind, and Fire influence. As a matter of fact, excuse me, on I'm not sure if it's the second album with Capitol. I think it was the second album with Capitol, which was produced by a guy by the name of Bobby Columbi. He's a drummer from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He produced the album. And when we went to LA to do our recordings, we recorded at the Capitol Studios there on Hollywood and Vine. Downstairs, they've got a couple studio rooms in there. We recorded in there. And Philip Bailey wanted to connect with Theo to write some stuff for his, he was doing his Easy Lover and all that stuff with Phil Collins. And he wanted to connect with T to do some writing together. And and I was the guy who used to drive everybody around, and I used to drop T over to Philip Bailey's house like daily. to go and work on stuff. And Phil, he actually sang on one of our songs. He sang on one of the songs on the Game of Life album. Yeah, so we had Philip Bailey, and our producer knew a lot of guys, and he also connected us with, George Duke played on some of our stuff. We went to his house. He had a studio there, and you know, you take the 2-inch tape, which we used to use in those days, and he did his keyboard parts and stuff in there. And then we had a guy by the name of, I think his name is Greg Dix, who was an arranger and also a producer, and he did the work with remember I Will Survive, that song. He did that, and he worked on a lot of other stuff. And so with our rhythm arrangements on that album, he was very involved with that. And so a lot of it wasn't really true to how we play and how we would have done it, because, you know, the producer, we didn't have the latitude. And so although it was funk oriented, it didn't come across how we would have done it. It's a lot of the music was changed around.
So talk to me, Dave, about how you guys worked in the studio with the Coakley brothers, and, you know, how that process kind of was orchestrated.
Well, we would end up in the early days, it was all real drums, and the later recordings, you know, it was drum machines and some live drums in it. We would pretty much have the studio. It would be like 12-hour days, and prior to going into the studio, we would practice the material in the Bahamas. All of the material that we did, we always ended up practicing it here in Freeport before we went into the studio. And depending on, you know, if we had a producer, whatever parts we might have worked out and said, well, we're going to do this part, the producer would end up changing a lot of stuff. Because I know, like, some of the solos that ended up, like, on the record, I had solos that I had worked out. He says, no. They would say, no, I want something free. So a lot of those solos, they just happen. As far as, he always liked to do the vocals in the wee hours of the morning. So his singing would happen then, because, you know, the voice gets higher pitch, and you know, you could hit the higher notes better than in the morning. You know, you got the frog in your throat. So for him, it was, you know, we, like 2 a.m. in the morning, we'd be like doing vocals. And you know, some of the songs, I know, like on the latter album, which the last album we did, which was pretty much pure funk, Take It to the Limit, you know, we'd spend like a couple of weeks on one song, working and tweaking and changing, and, you know, you send it to Capitol, and the producer says, well, give me more of this, add that, you know, get me some girls in this, you know, and then we would end up doing that. And they say, I can't feel the backbeat, give me some more, you know, some more lean into it. And you know, that pretty much would kind of determine the outcome. Now in the disco era, what would happen is Corey Wade would take our music to all of these clubs, you know, clubs where, you know, that were packed with people, and, you know, when they're doing the mixing, he would have them pop in our song, you know, that's still being recorded, but nobody would know that it's us or what's happening. And so he would put it in, and then if he'll see the reaction, and if a certain part he sees that there's kind of a lull where they're not really into it, he said, well, we got to change that. Or if he sees, well, they're really into this break, and when a certain part comes in, we're going to extend that. So he really tested it to make sure that, you know, the reaction was there, so that when it was released, it would get the reaction that he was looking for.
Did you guys rehearse a lot, you know, outside the studio, and what was your, you know, stage performance act like?
Yeah, we did a lot of rehearsal. You know, he's a perfectionist, and, you know, of late we've done since 2003. In the Bahamas, the band still has a big audience, and we've been doing reunion concerts. And within those reunion concerts, there have been like different arrangements that Theo would work out that we'd have to learn. And the unfortunate thing with those instances, though, is we don't get much time to practice. So in some of them, we might have had, like the last concert we did, I think we got maybe 2 hours or so. You know, he would send, however, he would change the arrangements, because sometimes he would end up, you know, the songs wouldn't be the full length, and so we'd end up with a medley. You know, so we may only do What You Want to Do. We may do like only 2 verses, and then we'll go into something else, and then maybe we'll return to it. So he would work out these arrangements and send it to us to work our parts and get ourselves familiar with it. And then we would go, because we're all professional musicians. I'm the only one who doesn't get to play as much as everybody else, but I get to play more now because I have a band. So once a week down in our dungeon here, we practice on a Wednesday night. And so if we have a big gig where we're doing a lot of new stuff, we'll practice a couple more days. It's 7 of us. So we've got 1 guitar, keyboards, and we have one of the singers that we just brought in. She also plays a bit of keyboard, so she plays some second keyboard, and we've got our drums. And what we do with the drums, in order to match up, our drummer plays an electronic kit, not sequence, but he plays an electronic kit. So when we come on after the DJ, because, you know, the DJs, these guys have these recordings with all these subsonics and stuff in it, low end, you know, gone to bed, as we could say in the Bahamas. So we're able to come on and match up with that, because we have some of those sounds inside the electronic drum kit, and which is critical, because otherwise when the band comes on, everybody comes off because it sounds empty. So that's been an incredible enhancement for us. And then on top of that, I use a digital mixing system, because it's hard to get engineers here to mix live and get us the sound that we want. So I use one of those Behringer XR series digital mixers with my laptop, and then I can go off with my phone and balance the band. And you know, so as we travel around, I pretty much have the basics already set. So I just carry my mixer, like we did a concert in on Abaco Island here, on the settlement of Hopetown, which is an incredible place with a lot of upscale houses, and it's just paradise on earth. And so we did this concert there, and you know, they had I told them what we needed for this fundraiser for the lighthouse, which is the only lighthouse of its kind right now in existence, actually still using the kerosene lantern. So we did a fundraiser there, and they had the speakers and everything, and I just went in with my board, which I already had configured how I needed to do, and I just had to do some tweaks with it, and we were good to go. So, you know, gone are the days when you have to use the old-fashioned mixer with the volumes and stuff, and you know, and you have to do everything. Every setup is a totally new, different deal. So now the digital age, the marrying of the digital age, and that's actually playing real instruments, because in the Bahamas, most of the bands here, you know, you have people pretty much like karaoke, and you know, they have stuff sequenced in the keyboard, and they might play along with it. And for me, I spent a lot of years in the studio as an engineer, and that's one of the offshoots that I ended up as when we disbanded. Actually, the last album that we did, I engineered it. It was recorded in the studio here, not too far from where I am now. And that was still in the days of 2-inch tape, very expensive equipment. You know, like gone are the days of spending 150 grand and 200 grand where you have to spend that money to get a good album. You know, you take 10% of that and buy the gear and do it at home. And that's why the big studios like the Compass Points and all those guys, they're struggling, because people aren't going in there. They don't have to. You know, it's a whole different day. And, you know, along with that comes the difficulty in selling music, you know. So because everything is like free now, you know, there are files and record labels are big dinosaurs, and people can get out there on their own. I mean, that's a good thing where you don't have to have the big labels behind you. You can actually do like what Justin Bieber and those guys do, and you become in demand. But you know, the other part of it is, you know, it's killed what we knew. It's killed what was organic, and now makes it into a contrived, programmed stuff with a bunch of guys who a lot of them can't play a lick of music. They're just grabbing riffs, guitar riffs and loops, you know, riffs that I might have played, loops from P-Funk and Isley Brothers and all these guys, and then they're just putting stuff on it, and nobody's playing any music. You know what I'm saying?
But yeah,
So,
you know, a lot of it, Dave, I think is education too. I mean, I think if the young people get educated about what real music is and get a sense of the difference, that they're not stupid. They get it. It's just they're not exposed to it. I mean, like my son is 12, and he's pretty discriminating because he's been exposed to, you know, what's real and what's not, so he knows.
That's like my son and my kids. You know, they've been exposed to a wide genre of music. You know, for me, that's why, like our band, I love, because we're playing everything. And so the moment somebody says, well, we can sequence this, no, we're not going there. We're going to play, you know, if it means, you know, a lot of the stuff, I'll end up maybe playing some of the key riffs that might have been on the keyboard. We change it up, and I'm playing it on the guitar. So, you know, we do Marley, we do some of the island stuff. I mean, we do Clapton, you know, we do Doobie Brothers, we do Aretha Franklin, we do James Brown. Like, we're all over the place. And that's what people like about the band. And that's what keeps it interesting for me. And, you know, people just get blown away because on our island, you know, you pretty much hear the same thing everywhere you go. Everybody plays the same song. They might be playing the songs in a different key, but it's basically the same rhythm. It's the same thing, and it's over and over and over again, which I can't do. So I'll do we do pieces of it. We mix it up. Because, you know, like I said, we go all over the place with the music, and we surprise everybody with the repertoire. You know, we even play some Beatles. Like, we do a killer, what is it? Come Together. We got a killer version of that.
Nice. So, and I see you holding on there to your faithful Strat, and I understand that's the one that played on some of these great tunes that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, this one was on 99% of everything we played. Like that album that you mentioned, like all the guitar parts I played on this. The album, when we did the album that's called Pure and Natural with Capital, an album that Theo produced, I had a Gibson at the time, and I played a good bit of stuff on the Gibson. There's a song that actually now turns out to be the most popular song for us that we play called Best of My Love. I played that with the Gibson. And but all of the other albums, because I'm really a Fender Strat guy. So no matter how much I go, I still end up right back with the Strat. This is a 1977 Strat.
Does it have a name?
No, it's just it spent a lot of time in bed with me back in the early days, because I was, you know, at least a minimum of 8 hours a day practicing.
It's like Hendrix, sleeping with your guitar.
Yeah, and so, but this guitar was a replacement for a Strat that I had that was a 65 Strat. So the parts that I played on our On Fire album, I played with that 65 Strat. But what happened is, when we did a gig with a guy by the name of Jimmy Casper. I don't know if you remember a song called In the Space Age. And we played the Apollo Theater. And during the time when our roadies were moving all of our gear inside, some guys broke into the truck and stole my 65 Strat, the bass from the bass player, also a 12-string of mine, and a bunch of the the type of outfits that we used to wear, which is kind of like, you know, back in that time was a lot of sparkle, and you looked like space characters and stuff like Star Wars. And so we had some expensive outfits. They stole those, and I ended up with this baby here.